然后昨天看深入其中，因为我刚好有一个师姐，我觉得可以国内比如说
I have water, yeah.
we just
They can interrupt as much as they want. I haven't even practiced timing, so I have 30 slides, so it should be 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Yeah.
在听你的之前，我没有想觉得这个，如果做的话，一定是做衣服。So we have
，perfect.
我觉得
香港，
刚好
香港
这个就是特别兴趣的一件事，然后是之前没有找到方向想法阶段，但我觉得现在可以落实。
好呀，
像你说的，就是招募这样做。那您
，foreign countries where they had so I mean that's right. Because it's online panels. Studies are not done like that. And the thing is, interesting.
因为我看不懂这个所以我觉得现在可能环境更
has access to the internet.
Right. And of course, what is the Thailand and this telling them? It's a lot of urban ceremony.
中英对比，
因为当时是有煎饼那就是也有，
Nice. So what I say.
都是那个就是老祖宗的是， 是后面对于我们来说就是
With the kids.
没什么用。对，王老师说，那时候我跟大家说，没事，反正就都没用。
Even until end.
This is somebody like some group.
然后它这很好接触，可能更加
对，
对。然后我觉得这次有三个条件。
That was supposed to have been Thailand.
是，对，所以我觉得这个如果
So
以那种大众，那你跟人说的一点，
对
吧？
对，
然后，所以我觉得
然后就是他那个
The pilot also had the main That's the sample size.
是，所以
The report is still began.
对象比较难用。我如果是说中部现实中的领导，我可能都得让自己家人去用，然后告诉我。对，因为有一些人他用了，就是国内他也不愿意承认。
是的，
对，所以这个访谈对象就相对比其他的内容更难找。然后那个王老师他编辑群里的那些人，然后大家都来用，结果都没有人给我反馈。我想大家都是羞于承认自己用。
真是对我
然后对，然后我现在就是觉得切入的角度还需要思考，因为如果只是说从伦理啊或者情感这个角度，就好像非常的好像大家都会从这个角度来讲，所以我想特别一点的角度，这个群体会好一些。然后我就想就是多听，看能不能对，因为昨天您那个就是给我的启发嘛。昨天就还就是跟您聊，就特别想跟您聊一下，因为我觉得
Research technical work on the position has the
做香港
blocks.
presentations talk about measurement of field path, for example. Yes,
It is so easy.
Data. If you look at most presentations, the second. It's vitally important.
It's tiny, but I guess it's location and bit of
Meeting in color. Actually, my job doesn't.
now at a water park,
But
合的话，设计它的机会。所以我觉得您昨天那个研究做的非常的干净，然后我觉得肯定能给我们很好的帮助。
It is working.
都有心理医治。sensitive 的，然后我就
Hello.
family, you know, dedicate
咱就是这个在一个说
Such not a really good measure of the impact of the policy.
香港。
A very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I understand it's a half day, so I really appreciate those who are here. I am very excited to host Professor Luca Maria Pesando. He actually has been a friend of CFPR. He gave a talk
True.
to 2023, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
remotely.
Yes, on cast, and was very well attended, and we thought it would be a great opportunity to have him back here. So let me introduce him first, and then we will have the talk. So since it's a small group, we can have question answers during the talk. He is open to taking those questions. However, we would like to leave some time for Q&A later. So we would like to end perhaps about 1. So we have plenty of time. And all right. So Luca Maria Pesando is Associate Professor of Social Research and Public Policy at NYU Abu Dhabi. Before joining NYU, he was an Assistant Professor of Sociology and Demography in the Department of Sociology and Center on Population Dynamics, McGill University. His research lies in the areas of social, economic, and digital demography. He is interested in issues of family, poverty, inequality, gender, social stratification, intra- and intergenerational processes, technology adoption, and interactions between life cycle events and human capital accumulation. His overarching research aim is to produce better knowledge on the link between family change, gender and educational inequalities in area where these dynamics are changing rapidly, and scant research is available. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure this works, but maybe you can. Okay, now it works, but it seems it goes off at some point. Anyways, let's try. Thank you very much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Kriti, for arranging this. It's nice to see old friends in person. And it's a very nice time to be out of the UAE, as you can imagine. So I'm glad that I made it. I'm here with family, so we're very happy to explore this beautiful city. I'm also happy that my postdoc is here, who is your wonderful student from NUS. So I'm glad that we are starting to establish more and more linkages between our institution. Okay, so today I'm going to present some very new work. I've never presented it anywhere. It's a collaboration. I'm not alone in this. I'm working with 3 other postdocs, based at Oxford, in the UAE, and in Australia. And I titled this provisionally 150 Years of Spouse Seeking from the Times of India's Matrimonial Columns. What we're doing here is to use this rich historical archive that the Times of India provides to get a sense of stated preferences, how stated preferences for partners and for partners' attributes have changed over the long durée. And by this, I mean about 150 plus years of spouse. Now, let me tell you more. Let me tell you why this. All good?
I don't want to omit someone, I think.
Okay, I think they're doing it remotely.
Yes, somebody is doing it already.
Let me give you a sense of why this matters. So we're trying to capture marital preferences here. As many of you know, and many of you actually do work on this, marriage in the context of India is really perceived not just as a union between individuals, but an alliance between families. And this kind of alliance is fundamental for understanding the social stratification system in the context of India, given that it reproduces and often it preserves social order. Now, marital preferences and in general, mating processes in the context of India are really strategic endeavors that are embedded in a broad context of kinship ties, joint family system, intergenerational bonds, and a system which is known as caste endogamy. What is caste endogamy? Is the idea of marrying an individual that belongs to your same caste. Okay, it's the opposite of intermarriage. So these really understanding marital preferences, especially marital preferences in an unconstrained way, and I will define them in a second, is fundamental for understanding social stratification system in the context of India, how this has changed, and potentially how it may change in the future. And this is also another way of addressing or targeting or building on this literature in sociology and demography that has identified this phenomenon of hybridization of family forms. What does this mean? This means that unions are not fully arranged anymore. There is more and more of a tendency to joint arranged unions with your parents. So individuals, especially women, have more and more of a say, and they negotiate their preferences with their families. So we're trying to see through this new novel data if we also find some sort of evidence of modernization, and we come up with a concept that is similar but not exactly the same. Now, of course, as again, many of us do work on this topic, there has been lots of work on mating, spousal preferences, even in the context of India. Sociology has contributed quite extensively, also in terms of ethnographies, providing lots of rich qualitative insights into norms and gender scripts. One potential limitation here is that these are usually smaller scale. There's snapshots of the population at one specific point in time, and they're rather limited in geographical scope, which is typical of ethnography. It's not a limitation, it's just how ethnography is conducted. Lots of work using surveys, IHDS, the DHS, the National Family Health Survey in the context of India, has been used extensively to study mating processes, spousal preferences. And also there has been some work in economics that leverages experimental or quasi-experimental methods to get a sense of which attributes are the most prominent when you choose and select a spouse. Here, the issue is that typically the surveys, by design, they include categories, right? You try to capture attributes using some specific questions, and questions by design relying on predefined categories. What we do here using a bit of a bottom-up approach and big data is to try to move beyond these predefined categories that surveys rely upon, because we're really letting the data speak. We're letting the matrimonial ads speak, see which categories emerge from the data themselves. And increasingly so, including from Kriti, there's plenty of work now using looking at matrimonial sites or how individuals are using the internet more and more to sort of co-help, co-aid in looking for spouses. This is wonderful, but at the same time, it's kind of more focused on the later period, right? Let's say 2000 onwards, because this relies on the internet, having high-speed internet at home or on mobile phones or mobile internet. So this is, I think, the closest that it gets to what we're trying to do here, but it really relies on the later period while we are trying to capture a historical kind of dynamic here. So we're claiming that what is missing here is to have data, longitudinal data on partner attributes for 100+ years, and also data that are rather unconstrained by predefined items, which are typical of sample surveys, okay? So what do? We try to fill this gap by constructing and analyzing a data set of over 26,000 matrimonial columns from the times of India, spanning 150 years. Now, this was a huge endeavor. You will notice this is a rather descriptive paper. It is actually a descriptive paper, and maybe not a very conventional one, sociologically speaking, but there's lots of work behind in terms of data scraping, mostly because the Times of India was not digitized at the very beginning. We're talking about 1850s, and then it has been digitized afterwards. So we had this combination of non-digitized plus digitized sources. We rely on matrimonial ads. For those of you who are not maybe super familiar with the Indian context, the Times of India includes, both in the past and right now, matrimonial columns. What are these? These are basically one section of the newspaper that includes some blurbs that specify the attributes that you're looking for in a potential partner. Or the attributes, I mean, some of your characteristics, let's say, 22-year-old woman belonging to a specific caste with MBA type of education, looking for a spouse that is 25 years old, blah, 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 from a specific caste, and so on and so forth. Okay, it's a way of looking for a spouse. Very often, again, this is co-arranged with your parents. It's part of this jointly arranged family system. It used to be fully arranged, now it's more jointly arranged. But these are basically, just places where people look for potential partners. And we scrape these matrimonial ads. We're claiming that these are perhaps, as of now, the longest running public archive of stated marital preferences. Now, this adjective stated is very important here because these are not revealed preferences. We cannot capture who the person ends up partnering with. These are just stated preferences. And this is an important distinction between stated and revealed preferences that I will pick up on towards the end of the talk. The other important caveat here that I want to make clear since the very beginning is that the Times of India capture a very specific socio-demographic group. Okay, so we're not talking about the whole population. We're not talking about the whole country. We're talking about a very specific group of the population, which we're defining here as the urban educated elite and the rising middle classes. Now, of course, this has changed over 150 years. So we're making several claims that we're capturing a broader and broader population over the years. But it used to be, at least at the very beginning, an extremely selected population, also because it relies on knowing English. Okay, this is an English newspaper. The other claim that we're making here is that we are capturing an upwardly mobile population. These are precisely those individuals who are able to adopt, negotiate, and legitimize new social norms, and building on extensive literature in sociology that talks about trickle-down effects. So something that happens in the elite eventually may happen similarly across different social classes, may trickle down across different social classes. We're making the claim that despite selected, this group may tell us something about what will happen eventually to the overall population as the phenomenon trickles down across social classes. Okay, so they are really the trendsetters. You, again, feel free to interrupt me at any point. Many of you are much more knowledgeable about India than me. So feel free to provide any kind of suggestion or comment. This is what I've just said. We're taking this as a potential glimpse into the future as preferences may trickle down across social strata. We're trying to locate this within the literature, and there's definitely a little bit of historical sociology. The team is also very mixed. I would say I'm more here. One of my co-authors is fully computational, has zero knowledge of sociology, and another instead is more of a sociologist. So we're trying to blend this work across different fields, with these three being the primary fields. I'm currently writing the paper. I'm trying to really write it in a sociological way because I think the finding is profoundly sociological, and I hope you agree with me. Okay, with this rich historical archive, we try to answer three different sub-questions. The first one, super simple, super descriptive: which personal traits have risen or fallen in salience over time? Okay, once we're able to identify the exact corpus of matrimonial ads, what are some specific characteristics that have become more and more prominent over the years? What are some that have become instead less and less prominent across the years? We have many here: looks, nature, personality, and these actually feature extensively in the matrimonial ads, and you will see in a second. Relatedly, when we look at markers of social status, caste clearly being one, occupation, education, how have these micro and macro level group boundaries evolved and rescaled? Is caste as prevalent as it used to be in the past when it comes to the matrimonial ads? Is occupation gaining more and more salience and prominence over the years? How are the matrimonial columns framing the social boundaries within society? And this, I think, is where we have the most interesting results as of now. And then we also try to see whether some of these preferences for attributes combine in some way. Okay, if there are specific bundles, do some attributes co-occur? Like, do people look, let's say, for a woman with white complexion belonging to a specific caste? And this is just an example. Fair and educated. Are these traits that co-occur, or does one trait occur more prominently than the other? Are these ads becoming more complex? Are people becoming pickier and pickier in terms of a combination of preferences that they are looking for in a potential partner? So this is what we mean by preference bundles. I think this is the least developed currently, so I'm glad to hear some of your thoughts here. Now, just for those of you who are not super familiar with these matrimonial columns, here is a snapshot of one. Again, this have changed massively from 1860 to 2011. But let me just, yeah, I can't read much here, but this is like a suitable match for Singa girl, MBA, Mumbai, beautiful and cultured. But you get the point, okay? So this is just one example. The other aspect that I want to make clear here is that whenever you have an ad such as this one, not all of the text actually captures matrimonial ads. And that was the most complex part of our computational approach. And I will explain you how we try to address that. But this is essentially the reason why we start with a huge corpus of 1.2 million ads, and we ended up instead with a tiny sample of 27,000, okay? Because we wanted to make absolutely sure that what we were capturing were precisely matrimonial ads. We have lots of sensitivity tests where we increase the sample progressively, but we opted for the smallest denominator because for that denominator, we're sure we're capturing actually matrimonial ads in several. Okay, so why can we treat the Times of India as a sociocultural space, arena, call it however you want? Well, these print ads somehow allow families to explicitly express their preferences, right? To put them in writing. Some of these preferences used to be just revealed within the kin network. The kinship network used to play and still plays quite a prominent role. So we're making the point here that print ads really push families to put in writing what they're looking for, forcing explicit articulation of value preferences. Also, as I'm trying to frame this in sociological terms, we're really building on Bourdieu, on Simmel, on this idea of distinction. Like English, for instance, knowing English, which allows you to read the Times of India, is a clear element of cultural capital that may serve as a piece of distinction within society, okay? And then the whole idea of trickle-down effects is something that comes from sociology, from the work of Simmel. So we're trying to build on this idea of sociology of elites, how the sociology of elites today may explain phenomena that may characterize the world of tomorrow. And also something that is important to mention is that the Times of India has been called many times the newspaper of record, okay? For many reasons, but it is primarily based on readership. At some point, this was the most widely read English newspaper in the world, not just in India. Okay, so this really provides legitimacy for middle-class families that value status and tradition. Someone is trying to enter there. Well, I can do it. Don't worry, Kriti, I can do it. Yeah. Okay, one example of the Times of India in 1849, I think. And one example of the Times of India, I think this was around the 2000. I don't know exactly, but
2011.
2011? Yeah, this is probably. Oh yeah, okay. Okay, so so why did I put these two? Well, for multiple reasons, but also to give you a sense of how the content of this newspaper has changed. This used to be primarily read by statesmen, post-colonial elites, and industrialists and intellectuals. And you see the kind of topics that were covered: government loans, defense bonds, battles, so history, diplomacy, politics. But the content of the newspaper, as well as the readership of the newspaper, has changed massively. And now it still preserves some of these elements, but also includes lifestyle, entertainment, consumption. So it has really massified. When you think about content of a newspaper, it has massified quite prominently, which happened in tandem with the expansion of the readership, of the class composition of the readership of the journal. Okay, so this is what I am trying to mention here, but also the Times of India served as a catalyst for driving English literacy. Okay, this was really a status symbol for boosting English knowledge within the general population. And as I was saying, this was paper-based, and now it's instead digitized. We're getting these digitized versions from the TDM studio, which is accessible from NYU Abu Dhabi. And this is the whole reason why we started this. We discovered that we could get access to this 1.2 million classified ads from ProQuest TDM through NYU, not Abu Dhabi, NYU in general, the NYU system, the library. And we started from that corpus of of archive that was digitized, fully digitized. So they ended up digitizing also the paper version that date back to 1860s, okay? This was what we started with, 1.2 million classified ads. You have seen the ads it's not just matrimonial columns, it's ads that include lots of other information. So this is quite technical and I don't want to spend too much time here, but we had to basically process the data, clean them, tokenize them, which usually means getting rid of information that is not relevant, parsing some of the text. You also see that the way they're written is kind of weird. Like it's not a prose. It's like words here and there, beautiful, educated, Mumbai, MBA. It's a bit of a fragment. So we had to think about ways to capture all this information in a way that made sense. And primarily our aim was to separate out the matrimonial versus non-matrimonial ads with columns within the ads. Okay, taking the ads, getting rid of the ones that have information not relevant for matrimonial columns, and preserving instead the one that had relevant information. Which is why we ended up with this tiny sample that I was saying before. We, again, as I said, we tried lots of robustness checks, also preserving the bigger sample, not much changes, but at least here, we're fully sure that we're capturing matrimonial ads.
Yeah, so can I ask you, so the 26,590 you are confident is all of the matrimonial ads from your first date to whenever that you stop?
Yes. And we, good question. And we also looked at the, let's say, historical distribution of this 26,000, just to make sure that, for instance, we were not only capturing 2,000 words, but we had a spread enough distribution that also captured ads from the 1850s. Yes, this is sort of evenly distributed from the beginning of our observation period to the end. Ads that we make, that we are sure, say 98% confidence interval, that these are matrimonial ads for the whole period. Yeah, this is, I mean, if any of you is more interested in the technicalities, I'm happy to tell you more later. But essentially, we use a combination of approaches. And we also tried our best to use a combination of approaches that were both deductive and inductive. So in terms of top-down approaches, what we did was, okay, let's define up front some attributes that we think signal to us that we're capturing matrimonial ads, okay? So you start with the opposite, cast names and subcasts. We wrote a list of all the possible casts and the most likely jati, that's a much longer task, to make sure that when we look for that word appears. So a list of castes, list of religions and ethnicities, education degrees, MBA, PhDs, occupations, and then we implement a flexible enough approach that identifies to us all the words that align with the attributes that we write. So these are obviously, we call this top-down because we decide up front the categories that we want to look for in the text, and we do some sort of search. That is basically what it is. If that word appears, we preserve it. If that word doesn't appear, we discard it. This is not enough, as you can think. This is good to capture something, but it's not good to make sure that we're actually capturing a matrimonial column. So we combine this with fancier, and I'm not part of this, so don't ask me too much, fancier aspects and NLP to extract noun phrase clauses. I'll give you a sense in a second of what this means, that appear naturally in the text. What are these noun phrase clauses? So here we're letting the data speak. We're not imposing a priori attributes or category, and we implement a natural language processing mechanism that captures something such as this expression, right? Mumbai-based bride. Why is this relevant? Well, why does it make sense to capture this? This is not captured at all through attributes, right? It has no caste, it has no occupation, it has no attribute, personality, look, nature. But still, this is suggesting that there's something else beyond this fragment that is relevant for a matrimonial column. Large Mumbai-based family, convent educated. This is not MBA, this is not high school, this is not university. Convent educated is still something that maybe. Okay, so I think you get the point. We combine these two, and this is what really helps us to make sure that we are capturing something relevant. Then we scored all of these. This is how we discarded some and we kept some. We basically created a score. If there is a specific cast word, that is something good for us. If there is a specific education category, that is good for us. All of this is getting scores. We sum up all of these scores. we set a threshold and we keep the 10% that has the highest score because it aligns with all of the requirements that we have specified in the previous slide. Okay, so we score all of these elements: economic status indicator, physical appearance, personality, cultural and social identity markers, profile and compatibility information. We end up with a distribution of scores. We decide up front, we're going to keep the top 10%, 5% of scores. This is how we also do the robustness checks. The 26,000 that you see is the top 5% that receives the highest scores. Then we try to broaden to the top 10% and at most top 20%. Then we stop there. But what you see is the top 5% that receives the highest score. These are the attributes tracked. I think you got the point by now. We try to categorize them in ways that make sense: ethnicity, caste, religion, language, region, state, occupational education, class, dowry mentions, location, family status. And then there are these other that are instead more about nature, personality, look, skin, complexions, height, weight, super prevalent. Height, weight are extremely prevalent. And now also increasingly so some biodata and horoscope information. We decided to keep them in these attributes that we're looking for. And ultimately, even this is really not the core of the paper, but we also said at the very end, let's do some topic modeling, text analysis. This is something I am more familiar with. What does topic modeling do? Well, you give them a text. We give them the text that we have identified as being matrimonial columns, and we asked the software to give us emerging topics. How are these emerging topics identified? It's called by term topic modeling, which means it identifies words that co-occur extensively in the text. There are words that may co-occur with high probability. This is just an example: fair and girl. They may appear very often in all of the classified ads. If it is the case that these words co-appear so frequently, this will carry a high weight for creating a topic. A topic is a group, is a cluster. Okay, so we're asking the system to give us clusters of information that emerge from these by terms, and you will see that the by terms that we identify, the topics, align quite nicely with some of our findings, especially when it comes to look and personality. Okay, let's move to the results. As I said, this is very descriptive, but I've given you extensive background here. We start from very basic metrics, which computational social scientists still believe are relevant metrics. The first one is the total document count, the total number of matrimonial columns for the whole period, 1865, 2011. This is a very crude measure, but still it gives us some evidence of what's going on. What we see is that the number of matrimonial ads has increased over time, okay, quite extensively, especially in this period, number of documents. Then we also look not just at the total number of documents, but the word count. Why is this important? Well, because it's telling us if the ads are becoming more or less complex, right? Are people adding more and more preferences, or are they just saying, looking for a 25-year-old man with MBA? Yeah. So the total word count is a proxy that is often used to capture complexity and complexity of preferences. It's still crude, but it's something that reveals something interesting. And complexity of ads has also increased quite extensively over the whole study period. And then what we do at the very end is to normalize these crude measures in many possible ways. So we control by the number of documents, by the number of words. We basically normalize our indicator by index, which is a combination of the document count and the word count. Anyways, you don't have to worry about these technicalities. What this is telling us is that once you normalize this index, both the number of words and the complexity has also increased, not as much as we see here because this was a crude measure, but still it has increased quite interestingly over time. There are some dips here and there. We see, for instance, small dips here. This corresponds to a combination of Second World War and Indian independence. Following Indian independence, there's been a bit of a dip, which is what I at the beginning of a dip and then instead of a boom. Okay, this is what I wrote here. This mirrors the middle class expansion and increasing literacy of the population. And then there has been a bit of a dip at the very end of the study period, 2005, 2009. Of course, we don't know exactly what is happening, but we're speculating that these may reflect the fact that matrimonial websites, not columns, are becoming more and more popular following the 2000s, which is what I was saying. Now, what are our 3 findings? And I want to preview them here so you have them in mind as I talk through them. This is the first finding, which is kind of surprising for us. What we found is that attributes such as looks and nature and personality, skin tone, height, weight, blah, 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 are the most dominant attributes across the entire 150-year period. So these are attributes that were prevalent in 1850. They have remained extremely prevalent as of now. And I'll show you exactly the words in a second. So the claim I'm making is individualism persists. Now, what is the context within which this individualism persists? Well, that context has instead changed quite a bit. What we really see from our findings is that this is a gender aspect. Okay? When it comes to attributes sought in women, these kind of attributes tend to be likability, suitability, and personality. When it comes to men, these attributes tend to be occupation, education, pretty much. Okay? So look is an attribute that is sought increasingly more in women rather than men over time. And then our other finding is that we find some evidence that caste specificity has declined over time. Caste seems to be mentioned less and less over time. It was never mentioned that much, actually, in the matrimonial columns, and this was also surprising to me. But instead, other types of group boundaries have become more and more prominent. What are these other group boundaries? Religion and language, basically. And we try to make sense of this in a historical perspective, which I will guide you through in a second. So it's not that, I mean, specificity has remained, but it has shifted from a caste component to a religion and language component. Okay? So we're making the claim that the boundaries have become more macro. They used to be more micro level. They have become instead more macro level, but they're still there. Okay, let's look at this looks premium, which I think many people find as the most interesting finding of the study, and this idea of gendered, and this finding this is extremely gendered. I think this is rather self-explanatory, but let me just make sure that we're on the same page. This red or orange relates to any attribute that captures men's appearance, any attribute that captures women's appearance, any attribute that relates to weight and height. We're not able to separate this by gender. Okay. What do we see here? Well, first of all, the first finding was that this used to be prevalent. About 50% of the ads used to have some of these looks elements in 80-90, went sort of 80-85, and still now this is quite prevalent. Almost up to 75% of ads include some element of look. Okay, then you see from the bars that the yellow bars have increased. They were already quite prevalent, but they have increased quite massively. So this is just telling us that attributes related to looks in women has become more and more prevalent over time. Okay. Aspects such as beautiful, pretty, sharp features are aspects that are increasingly sought in women over time. And so we're also making the point that by making these attributes visual in the ads, somehow we're commodifying quality in the public sphere, right? In the public space. So we're also making the claim that these Times of India, by allowing you to state your preferences quite explicitly, are contributing to commodifying this aspect of women's beauty a little bit. When it comes to men's appearance, which is the red bars, it used to be less prevalent. It's becoming more and more prevalent, especially after Indian independence. So around here, you see that men's looks starts appearing more and more, but it's still quite less prevalent than women's looks. Okay, so this is where we're making the point that this is a gendered aspect. Okay, let's look into the nitty-gritty of these looks, a complexion, which I said at the very beginning. People talk about complexion a lot in these matrimonial ads. These are some of the words that we isolated here: fair complexion, pale complexion, white complexion, wheatish. I don't know if that's the way you pronounce it. I guess wheatish. Yeah, a word that I wasn't aware of, but apparently extremely common in. Okay, so what do we find here? Well, a bit of a weird finding that white adjective used to be extremely prevalent. It has gone down a lot, but this has been completely paralleled by an increase of wheatish, which is more politically correct, not only Whitish, fair, and a little bit Whitish towards the end of the period, okay? So people used to write white much more, and now they typically write fair complexion. How are we making sense of this? Well, we always see for all of these attributes big jumps around independence. So Indian independence and the partition seems to have had a massive impact on how these ads were written and the extent to which they were written. But at the same time, this also suggests that colorism has remained prevalent. It hasn't really changed. It's just the way you express colorism that has changed in a more politically correct direction. But colorism remains quite prevalent. Again, if anything, the public market visualizing preferences has amplified this aspect in a similar way as what we just said about women's looks. Okay, education. And remember, I've said previously that caste seems to decline a little bit, but conversely, aspects such as occupation, education, language, and religion seems to gain more traction. Here, the discontinuity around independence is even more prevalent, which makes sense. I mean, education wasn't mentioned at all previously, or very minimally. And instead, now it's mentioned pretty much in 100%, 80 to 100% of ads. These are the categories: primary, secondary, graduate, postgraduate. And I think this is also what signals clearly that the sample is selected. As I told you at the very beginning, look at primary, a little bit, but virtually non-existent. All of what we see here is about graduate and postgraduate. And you saw from the example of ad that I gave you before, is an MBA, PhD, MBA, PhD, MBA, PhD. This is pretty much what it is. You see that education has become quite a massive attribute that people look for. Okay, so we're making the claim that degrees become the new currency of. I think you may have touched. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Another interesting finding relates to religion. We had no priors here, at least I had no priors, no expectations. What we see is that also when it comes to religion, religion wasn't mentioned much. And instead now, again, close to 100% of ads include religion. So religion seems to have become now a clear marker of in-group versus out-group boundaries. Okay, you have here the classification here, and as I wrote at the very end of this slide, you notice an overrepresentation of minority religions here. Jains, Sikhs, and Christians are overrepresented relative to the population, which reflects their economic status.
Absolutely. I mean, just thinking, just from my life experience, I suppose, is before independence, they may not have spoken about religion because there was an implicit assumption that everybody was Hindu, for example. Yes. And that's probably more likely, because I can't imagine that people more likely to intermarry pre-independence between religious groups. I think it happened, but it was pretty uncommon.
Yeah, clearly. So the fact that this is low reflects a historical contingency, definitely. But still, after independence, you see somehow an increasing pattern in terms of mentioning religious categories. So perhaps we should reframe this a little bit by saying that what really matters when it comes to religion is looking at post-independence trends. And when we focus on post-independence trends, there still seems to be an increasing tendency to mention religion as a marker, as a desired attribute for a potential partner in this data. Okay, so yeah, this probably needs to be rephrased a little bit. Okay, let's move to caste, which is where instead I had priors and they were pretty much completely wrong. So let's look, and this also has an important historical contingency, by the way, right? These are administrative caste categories. We also have the jati figure, but it's not finalized because it's tons of jatis and it's been a bit of a mess. But these are the administrative caste categories. So the macro categories, general, other backward classes, scheduled caste, and scheduled tribes. One general finding here is that mentions of caste are relatively infrequent. Even in the later periods, look at the y-axis, this is 20% of the ads, okay? So it's very far from the 80-90% that I was showing you before. 20% of casts. There are different reasons here. One is that most ads still use specific Jati names, not the macro casts, but the Jati names. And we're getting there, we're almost there with that figure. But even when we look at the Jati figure, just believe me for now, caste is not as prevalent as some of the other attributes in this historical analysis. Okay, so it is still the case that even when you look at Jati, many people omit these categories from matrimonial ads, which instead my prior is perhaps the first and main aspect that people explicitly reveal in a matrimonial ad. Doesn't seem to be the case, at least according to this data. Still, when we look at the administrative caste categories, the most prevalent one is the general one, which again reflects the selectivity of the sample, the relatively high SES composition of the people who post, and the kind of attributes that people look for in the Times of India. This is something that we find actually more interesting than the caste category itself. This is the frequency of ads that mention the label caste no bar. Okay, now, for those of you who are not super familiar with this label, caste no bar, this means that a family is expressing the willingness to transcend caste boundaries, okay? It's expressing the willingness not to mention a specific caste. So it's a sign of secularism, let's put it that way. What do we see when it comes to the caste no bar label? And this is really a label that people write explicitly, caste no bar. Actually, let me see, I think I saw it before in the ad. It was very clear in one of the ad. This is the label itself, and also if you look at the specific ads. Yeah.
On that.
Yeah.
The classification that you've done, does it account for the column title? Do you include that in each ad that follows?
No, we're not including this because this is, sorry, where? Okay, there are different instances here. This is where the complications emerge. So does this refers to the following ad?
Yes.
Yeah, so what we do here is, it typically depends on what the content is. In this case, caste no bar is among the attributes that we decide top down. So this would be included here. Religion, this would be included too, something like this. Sorry. So aspects that relate specifically to socioeconomic status, we include them. But the way we decide to include or not include is depending on what follows these words. Okay, so we have to specify in the coding what are the kind of words that follow this and what are the kind of words that anticipate this, right? So in this case, whatever anticipates caste no bar refers to the previous ad, correct?
The following
This
one.
does not relate to this.
Yes, it does not.
Exactly. While instead this relates to this. So we need to specify in the code that whenever these big labels are appear, to only consider whatever comes next and not consider whatever comes before. So we interpret caste no bar related to the following ad and not, yeah.
So and for the caste categories,
Yeah.
not the jatis, but the caste categories, the original list that you prepared.
Yeah.
Did you also scan, or however it is that you did it, the column titles?
Yes.
For that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I can tell you more on that. Lots of debates, but it seems not to affect it much. But these are important decisions which took such a long time. Okay, let's go back to this, which I mentioned before as being a marker of secularism. This is quite again 1950 post-independence, so we sort of subset the graph, which makes more sense. Caste no bar rises steadily, exploding post-2000 to over 50% of caste mentioning ads. Now, what is this signaling? Is this signaling that caste doesn't matter anymore? Given all of the other findings that we have, that's not really the case. The way we are interpreting this, and we call it modern distinction, is basically a trade-off where people are more and more prone to specifying occupation and education as being what determines the desired pattern they have in mind. still assuming that that primarily will happen within broad caste categories, okay? So we're not really erasing the fact that caste matters for your potential partner, but the fact that you mentioned caste no bar reflects some modernity on your part, right? It signals your cultural capital in some sense. It signals your willingness to widen the pool of high quality matches.
It's sort of virtue signaling as well.
What?
It's sort of virtue signaling, you know, you're in this sort of posh family.
Exactly.
Oh, we don't care about caste, but they do actually really care about caste. So they'll get all the
Exactly.
adverts, people come back and they'll make their decision, which isn't necessarily the outcome of what you see from the
Yeah.
advert.
Yeah, so it's kind of a statement of distinction, statement of.
So secular and open-minded. Sorry, but also very cynical.
Yeah. Definitely. Going back to religion, I mentioned language and religion seems to have increased quite massively. It's kind of similar to language. You see here northern, northwestern, eastern, northeastern, western, southern. Again, historical contingencies matter heavily. Look at its continuity. But even if you look at the post-independence period, there seems to be an increasing trend in mentioning linguistic lines. Okay, so if we interpret this in terms of historical events, regional identities surged after India's internal borders were redrawn along linguistic lines. And again, language itself, we're interpreting it as an element of distinction, as an element of cultural capital, sort of what you rely upon to have some element of shared culture, food, festivals, child rearing, theaters, whatever, cultural consumption. Any element of cultural consumption is very nicely captured by language as a proxy. Yeah. So this is again suggesting that the boundaries are not disappearing, they're still there, but they seem to be traced or drawn at a more macro level, not really in terms of caste, even if caste is still prominent, but people don't signal that. What they signal is that what matters for them is language, is religion, and for men, occupation. We did something simultaneous.
We have time.
Yeah.
Please continue. 7
Yeah,
more.
yeah, okay, I'm done, pretty much done. So we also look for ads that explicitly mention class, okay? Middle class, upper class, they actually do not mention these labels specifically, but within these labels, we categorize the attributes, okay? So we categorize attributes under middle class and upper class, and this is how the graph looks like. Not sure what to get out of this. I mean, middle class seems to be mentioned more and more. It's not really sure what. Something that is interesting that post 2005, these terms seem to decline a little bit. Again, may suggest that occupation, income, and lifestyle markers are becoming more prominent factors. But the fact that class itself is mentioned may suggest that the boundaries have been redrawn in different ways. We also did something else that similar to the class, but we basically categorized all terms that could fall under the category of progressiveness and all terms that could fall under the category of traditionalism. So progressive, traditionalism, and none. These are ads that mention no words that can signal progressiveness and traditionalism. What do we see here? Well, again, this is the progressive terms seem to have gone down a little bit. This is the traditional terms that seem to have gone down, could go up quite important, right? Again, some of these traditional terms, once we look at them, they actually refer to culture, they refer to education, respected family, like looking for a spouse from a respected family. These are kind of terms that fall under the traditional category, at least in our classification. This can be redone in many different ways. But it's interesting to see that all of these traditional labels seem to have gone up quite a bit. It really suggests that, yes, modernization is happening. Boundaries seem to have been redrawn at a higher level of analysis, but still, all of this is happening within a demand for traditional characteristics, such as education and occupation. Okay, and the last part that I want to show you, which is where we're still doing a bit of work, is this idea of bundles. Which terms co-occur most prominently? And this was a ton of labels. Of course, it's a ton of attributes. So we had to create groups. Terms that fall under looks, typically skin complexion, height, weight. Nature, which to be honest, I don't remember exactly what it is. I think it's tame quiet.
Homely.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. But I don't want to spend too much. And then, of course, they are ranked from the bottom to the top. You see that looks and nature, and reflects the prevalence. You see that when it comes to looks and nature, both of these independently have been the most prominent terms throughout the whole observation period. Any term that refers to looks and any term that refers to nature, they have been extremely prominent since the very beginning. They have intensified a little bit in this period, but even on their own, they have been extremely prominent. Then another common combination, which is appearing not since the very beginning, not here, but afterwards, is the combination of personality and physical. So again, tame, tall, man, something like that. Okay, respected, tall man. All right. This is the combination of personality and physical. And as you go up, this is exactly what this means. Like we're bundling characteristics under different labels. But again, it definitely shows that preferences have become more complex over time, but still not that complex, or not as complex as I would have expected a priori. Look at, and we also have, for instance, the label caste alone. You don't see the label caste alone here, right? You only see caste appearing together with other big bundles. And that's precisely because caste alone doesn't appear. Even when we look at jati, caste alone is not as prevalent to warrant a category in and of itself. Caste appears in tandem with other aspects, personality caste, physical personality caste. What really seems to matter is nature and looks, which is sort of, perhaps it's the nature of the ads that is just what they're about. Lastly, I mentioned the topic models. We run topic modeling. Topic modeling means, are there clusters that emerge from the data that tells us something based on byte terms? But actually there are. These are labels that we gave ourselves. This is based on an algorithm. The algorithm fits the number of topics. We obtain 4 topics as being the solution that maximizes power of our data. These are the 4 topics that emerge from the data, and then we label them based on the most relevant words that characterize the topic. Okay, so let's look at topic 1. These are the most relevant words. There are different metrics for defining the most relevant words, but most distinguishing words: boy, family, settled, salary, well-placed. Okay, so we call the first topic established man. Second topic, boy, graduate, MBA, engineer, suitable. Educated men. Then women, then girl, fair, white, beautiful, slim.
Okay.
Very demanding, very deep. Women's complexion. Girl, attractive, smart, beautiful. Women's appearance. Okay, so this is what the data tell us about the byte terms that distinguish the groups, which I think is pretty much quite telling. It goes along very well with the looks graph that I showed you previously. We're not putting lots of stress on the topic models, but we thought this was nice enough to confirm the looks figure that I showed you before. Okay, let me close. How are we interpreting all of this? This is lots of findings. Perhaps there are other attributes that we should have looked at that we haven't looked at yet. But the way we're interpreting this as of now is that the in-group component is not disappearing. It is still there. It has just scaled up a little bit from caste to broader group identities such as religion and language. Okay. Caste nobar, as we were saying before, really acts as a signal of cultural capital, a signal of distinction. That doesn't mean that caste doesn't matter anymore. Perhaps it matters a little less than before, but not really, because if you look at the percentage of intercaste marriage, it's still quite low. It's 15% in the overall population. So the elites are trading caste purity for modern status. They really signal caste nobar because they want to signal modernization. But still, all of this is happening within religious and linguistic boundaries. So we came up with this term that we call strategic modernity, whereby individual choice entered the process, but it operates within still rigidly defined parameters. This one big finding that is confirmed by the topic modeling is the gender asymmetry. Men tend to be heavily scrutinized for education and occupation. Women tend to be heavily scrutinized for suitability and looks. And this has become even stronger and stronger over time. So it really seems that media have reinforced that. They haven't contributed to weakening, they have contributed to reinforcing that. Modernization also has not erased colorism. Remember the graph that showed all the white going down and fair going up? Pretty much colorism remains there. It's just a different way of labeling colorism. Endogamy is not disappearing, it's just moving to a broader perimeter. That's how we call it, language and religion. And modern individualistic preferences are on the rise, yet within strict enforced macro boundaries. So going back to the contribution, where we're showing how we can use digital trace data to get sociological evidence on family change in the context of India from a historical perspective. Theoretically, our findings seem to partly challenge the modernization theory. We show that modernization is happening when it comes to individual preferences on looks and appearance, but it's happening within strictly defined boundaries. So we call it a recomposition of boundaries. It's not an erasure of boundary, and this is what we label strategic modernity. And then sociologically, well, we're trying to frame all of these through acts of distinction, acts of cultural capital, trickle-down effects, and class emulation. So we cannot say anything about the lower social strata in society. We're still making the point that if trickle-down effects occur over time, class emulation may happen at some point over this set trait, not the previous one. Okay, I think I've mentioned extensively the limitation, English-speaking, urban elites, not representative, stated preferences, not revealed preferences. We don't know who people end up choosing. They just know they would like to choose. And we also, unfortunately, our data end in 2011. So it's still pretty good, 150 years, but it would be amazing to have actually the Tinder, Bumble eras to see what is happening. Some of the graphs show a bit of a decline, as you may have noticed, in the latest period. So it may be the case that if we had those data, we could capture that decline. And these are just some ideas for next steps, which I actually prefer to hear from you because we're exhausted of. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now the floor is open for questions. Yanman?
I have actually 3 questions. First is, can you speak more about like the process of posting the ads in times of India, the screening process? And second question is, what is the proportion of text used to describe oneself versus describe the mate you're looking for? And are there any differences in the attributes one used to describe oneself versus describe the people they're looking for? And the third question, I see there are difference in difficulties of finding a mate. For example, some indicators are just convenient indicators of short, long way, like nature, look, personality, but for caste, religion, and language, maybe it's because the people are so hard to find people of these attributes in real life, so they have to post an ad. They are hard to find a particular religion in real life, so in the ads they tend to show them. But in reality, maybe it's so convenient to find the same caste person. They don't have to show it in the ads. So that might be a possibility of seeing a different pattern here.
Yeah, okay. Let me start from the posting process, which seems also has changed quite extensively. I remember I asked the same question to my co-author in this project. And it seems, at least as of now, it's relatively straightforward. There is a little bit, I wouldn't say censorship. It's not censorship. So there is a little bit of pre-check. But otherwise, I think I was told this has become quite automatized, right? I don't remember how frequent is the Times of India. It's a weekly, right?
No. Every day.
Every day. Okay.
Yes.
But the columns don't appear every day. I think they appear on one specific day, or they appear every day.
No, I think now they appear because it's
Yeah, I think it used to be the column used to be weekly, and now it's daily column themselves. So now I remember the discussion. What I was told is that when the column used to be weekly, which is 30, 40 years back, there used to be much more check and controls and a bit of pre-check on the content itself. Now it's a step quite automatized. It's even an online system as far as I was told. So there may be a bit of selection there in terms of who got to post 9 years back and who gets to post today, which I think actually reflects the fact that word count has increased, the number of ads has increased. I think now it's just more of a commodified good posting, right? There used to be in the past. So clearly some selection there, hard to address it, but clearly some selection there. The second question is a very important one, and I think is super complicated in the sense that when you post, you say something about yourself and you say something about the other person. The potential person. So the way we are trying to address that to make sure that we primarily capture posting about the other person, not about yourself, is again to create a code that tells us what comes before a word and what comes after the word. So we sort of train a model to tell us if whatever is coming before a specific attribute that we define up front refers to you as a subject or to another person. It's not perfectly precise. So whenever we try some of these models, we go back to the data themselves and we ask the software to give us an example of a blurb to make sure that we're capturing something related. Of course, we cannot do it for 26,000, but it seems to be capturing mostly. Once we implement those criteria, our model seems to be capturing mostly posting about the other person. Margin of error for sure. I remember having this conversation also with a colleague. He said, I think it was that problematic because even when you talk about yourself, that is something we may want to capture in the data. I don't agree. I think we really want to make sure we're looking for the desired partner himself. So, do you have any better idea of training a model based on what comes before and what comes after? That is welcome. But so far, that's what we did. The third point, for sure, I think what you're saying, there's also a question. I think what you're saying is very applicable, for instance, to religion, right? As you notice from the graph, Christian was quite prevalent. And I think that's perhaps the case that given they're not the majority in the country, people feel like they have to specify Christian because like that it requests something different. There, yeah. I'm sure what I'm trying to say is that I'm sure that some of what the graphs show reflect the sparsity of population groups in the population. Yeah. But these I'm a little less concerned about because it still signals that potentially more opening towards interreligious marriage, caste marriage, may be the case.
We have Prem.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Luca, for a wonderful presentation. Yeah. So just, I want to ask on the data part a little bit and then some other things, because it seems to be, I'm not sure, the Times of India had a lot of regional editions. I think your edition, because there are a lot of Jains in your thing, and the Times of India was, I think it's still owned by the Jain community, if I'm not mistaken. So I was wondering if you can bring in the context of the, again, I don't know about the caste system among the Jain,
Okay.
but, how prevalent it is or the average. So I was wondering whether it reflects something that specific to the community because they're obviously very overrepresented in your data. I think there are only 2 or 3 or maybe less than 5% of the population. But in your case, yeah. So maybe could that be a contextual information that could be relevant for your analysis, especially in the later part of the year?
In the sense that you're concerned maybe that we may be losing some ads that are more regional ads.
Yeah.
We are, let's say, overweighting some ads.
Yeah, I think maybe the ads are reflecting more on what's happening in the Jain community as opposed to what's happening in the India as general.
Okay.
Because I think one of your charts had the religion thing, where you it seems like I don't know the percentage, but it seems quite a significant percent of the ads mention Jain. So that's, and the paper is owned by Jains, was owned by Jains. So so at least the Mumbai edition could be mainly Jain. So I was wondering if the data also has the regional editions because they also publish regional editions.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Maybe the ads are not the same because the pricing is different. So you can, if you buy the Mumbai edition, the price is different. Yeah. Or if you want to put the national, the price.
Perhaps even posting a matrimonial column has a big
So that that was one of my things about the edition.
Thank you. I don't think I have an answer, but it's a very helpful suggestion.
Yeah, I think I was wondering also because as some of the column names have the caste names, like in the example that you showed. Would that also be, if it is not, because sometimes if they mention the top, they would not mention it on the bottom because all the ads are specific to that thing, like for that community, like there are 3-4 ads. I think you said Agarwal, which is a caste name.
Exactly.
Or Brahmins, and then they'll have like 10 ads. All these 10 ads would be under that column name, if that is captured by that.
Okay. Can I piggyback on Prem's comment?
Yeah.
So two things. I mean, on both these things and a few others, we can chat later as well. The readership, right, sort of the newspaper, I think, is a key missing piece, I think, here. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that from the analytical piece you should you have a way of getting to the readership. Also, because the matrimonial ads don't necessarily target only the prospective grooms or the brides themselves. It's a network. Right? So it's whether or not I read an ad in a paper for somebody else who may not be reading the Times of India at all. So it's a hard one, but I think somewhere you should probably acknowledge that there is, no data in some sense of readership. Yeah. The point on caste, the fact that you don't see caste sort of show up is a surprising element. Look, and so which is why I think, again, something to probe. Yeah. There are ads in which are listed. So when you're trying to post an ad, I haven't done this myself, I will confess, but I know. But I know. When you're posting the ad, you have to pick a category. That do you want it published under a specific caste category? And I can show you right now ads which will be listed under a caste category. The ad itself will say caste no bar.
Okay.
Which means that when posting the ad or filling up the form as it used to be, you would pick a caste category, but in your own ad, you sort of say
use the term.
So now I think that there has to be a way for you to pick up the category and apply it to every single ad. So if it's
in that category that you pick up front is the big title that appears.
Yeah.
Yes, the ones that said Manglik, etc. Manglik is not a caste, but yes, all of those things. Yes.
Okay.
Agarwal was mentioned in.
Agarwal. I mean, there will be classifications within Agarwal, and there will be so those have.
There are just so many.
Those must feature in your what you attribute then to each ad. But the other question I think is in terms of that I had was in terms of the editions of the newspaper.
Yeah.
So which edition did you have access to?
Tell me more.
So there's for example, a Times of India Bombay edition, a Delhi edition, etc. Right? So because Times of India has been around for so there are different editions of the newspaper where earlier the Sunday classifieds, right, where the matrimonial ads featured were edition specific.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And online, all of this is sort of jumbled up, but you can still earlier your Sunday classifieds were where matrimonial ads featured were always specific to your own place. You could also, when posting an ad, select, do you want it to only appear, for example, in the Ahmedabad edition, the Bombay edition? You could, I think, select 4 or 5 editions, paying a little more money for how many editions of the newspaper you wanted your ad to appear in. So I think, again, clarifying your source of data in terms of which editions have you looked at. Also, by the way, one last thing, trivia on this, but the size of the ads, right, sort of varies because you pay per word.
Paper word, yeah.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and I like that. I mean, it's very interesting to see that goes up over time because people are clearly willing to pay more.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course. Thank you. Yeah, very, very useful.
Yes, we have one more question.
Yeah, those are great. Yeah, they're very interesting. And it was not quite the same, but just the idea of the impact of globalization. I mean, there's so much of Indian diaspora, coming to and coming fro, and how that might be visualized in the data you have. I don't know whether it would, but I just wondered.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful question. What we're trying to do, for this project, but related, is to actually use newspaper data from other countries, mostly from migrant groups in the US. That's where we are right now. That's the only thing we've been doing. Actually, Kira Allendorf, who's a big scholar of sociology in India, she's doing something similar on migrants currently in the US. their mating preferences, and Indian migrants who have been in the US and they've returned home to precisely capture. So I was in conversation with her because I asked her exactly the same question if she had suggestions, and she told me that she thinks there is a way to get at that using newspaper data or online data, sorry, not just newspaper, but online data, including dating apps data that gives you more information on the migrant groups. So I think that could be potentially captured a little bit to get at this circulation of ideas.
You might be able to get exactly the same kind of data because, for example, in England, I can't remember what it's called, but like there's a massive Muslim dating site. So anybody who identifies as Muslim and wants to marry or meet somebody who's Muslim is only going to go on that site, probably. I mean, and they might diversify their chances, but I think there's a lot like so that just might skew things. I don't know if that's the same in India. I don't know.
I mean, as far as I know, when I was in the US, I remember one of my closest friends is Indian. There was something similar in the US, especially in California, actually. He was from California. Precisely that mirrors what you just said about Muslims, about Hindus in the US, California. So there may be state-specific websites such as those, but colleagues may know more. But I think that's a good way to go, actually, to look at this matrimonial state-specific sites in different countries different than India.
Just a suggestion, look for NRI. That's also a word, NRI. NRI. So
Resident Indian.
Non-resident
Indian. So that's often mentioned in the ads.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Like a status. It's also like a status differential in the sense that, oh, our boy is well placed, NRI, and then they may even mention the country. So that I have seen.
That capture a little bit of that within this study.
We have more questions from Prem.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe sometimes I think they use the word foreign.
Foreign.
I think we're capturing. I think we have foreign at least. NRI.
NRI. NRI is I think the most popular term used to capture immigrants.
Yeah, I think maybe because I think, as you say, there are very targeted sites for specific communities now because all the matrimonial companies, they have a separate website. It's basically the same site. Separately. So just in Tamil Nadu, there are 20, this is run by the same company, but they'll say Nadar Matrimonial, which is a specific community, like whatever. Like it's the same company that runs it, but the website is like named differently and it's advertised differently. So it's in a sense, you can post your ad on the main matrimony, but you can also post it, it's the same thing, but you can also post it on Nada Matrimony, which is run by the same company and everything is the same. But obviously you can't post there, I would assume, if you're not but Nada, whatever the community person is. Right. So maybe it becomes much more complicated after the 2005 is because of all these things. Even before that, because the newspapers also, various communities also had their own matrimonial newspaper, like whatever. It's not like a regularly published newspaper, but for example, they had their own things where the ads, community paper, so to speak. And again, Times of India seems to be kind of more for people like who are much more secular in that sense. So I'm talking about whether like endogamy has gone up, gone down, is in a sense very selective because people who go to Times of India, because there are a lot of other avenues, even in the past. That even in the 1950s, there are a lot of avenues where you can advertise, like regional papers, as you mentioned, or like within the caste-specific papers and things like that. So so that might be something we're looking at. And I mean, the final one I want to ask is there something on the marital status, like widowed, remarried in the ads? Because sometimes because it's difficult to find a partner if you're widowed or like remarried, right? So they tend to advertise more. In that sense, I would assume, because right now there are separate websites. But in the past, maybe you will find more people who are widowed or who are divorced and want to remarry. For them, finding a partner is difficult.
So we checked that actually. I remember I asked one of my colleagues the same question. a word that appears a little bit is widow, definitely much more than remarried.
Yeah.
Remarried appears very, very rarely. So, and to the point that we decided not to include it because it didn't meet the threshold for a frequently recurring word. Widow, I think we have it, we just haven't plotted it yet, but it may be actually good to plot it as a way to further discuss the selectivity of the sample, of the specificity of people who post here. Yeah.
On that, you could do sort of subgroup analysis. You could say, how do these patterns look amongst those who are under the remarried / widowhood categories? And you might find it be very different. I mean, I can sense what it might be, but it might be interesting as a little.
Yeah, I mean, that goes a little bit back to Yanwen's question in the sense that widow or remarried refers to you.
Yeah.
Right? So it usually appears at the beginning.
Yes.
And then, and then once we're able to track that, we can look at the desired attributes in the partner among the widow. Yeah.
So general versus widowed.
Yeah.
Seekers.
Yes, we have an online question as well. It's from Hushu.
Hello, Uju. Let's see here. Unique matrimonial ads. Does it mean some families posted their matrimonial ads multiple times? Does the number of times the same ad appears signify something about the family or preference? For smaller community sites, hence taking longer to search. Okay, let me take it one by one. Okay, so we checked, I remember, yes, we checked the extent to which the ad appeared exactly the same time, and we dropped duplicates. What we did there was to drop duplicates, I think, within the same year. So the time frame we used for identifying an ad that was a duplicate was the year. If it was beyond the year and it was the same, I think it's including the data. That's what I remember as of now. So I don't think we can really speak about the extent to which reposting means more commitment or something like that because we dropped the duplicates. Would you please share more about the patterns of category combinations? Which categories tend to go with traditional Outlook or biodata horoscope? More about the patterns. Okay, let me see here. Okay, I think this is what the question refers to. I think as I said before, when it comes to the traditional, the traditional label was before. When we use the traditional labels here, let me tell you the labels. I have them here. Give me a second. So I can tell you exactly what we classified as traditional and what we classified as progressive. So progressive is anything that includes modern, liberal, progressive, broad-minded, cosmopolitan, open-minded, independent, while traditional includes traditional, orthodox, cultured, strong values, homely, which I think you mentioned before, religious, non-vegetarian, vegetarian, and teetotaler. Yeah, okay, that's what it is. Yeah, so these are the kind of, for this graph, at least these are the kind of attributes that we categorize as traditional versus progressive. For the biodata horoscope, to be honest, I don't remember. I will have to get back to you because the findings were not very clear, so we haven't included them in the final text. Does the newspaper charge different rates or different columns? I mean, no, the rates varies by length of the ad. That's all that I know, but not for, I don't think for different columns. You mean if it appears at the very beginning of the page versus at the end? I don't know. Do you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure Times of India monetized everywhere.
If I think about how to post things in Italian newspapers, that's also the case. So we may have to check that, but I don't know how exactly this would affect our findings.
But that wouldn't have been the same from the 1889. So
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think that would have.
different thing.
right? I don't think that would alter what we're trying to capture here. I mean, of course, it captures those who are potentially more affluent because they post at the very beginning of the page. But yeah, it's
What
like
is the cost? I mean, if it costs
it's
isn't
slightly different.
very much, then these are richish people who are doing it. I mean, there may be marginal difference. I mean, the
Yeah.
cost really isn't very high.
Costs of place, but thanks for the suggestion. We will check. Thank you very much. I'm not sure. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. This was very interesting. It's the first time that we present this, so it's super helpful to have all this feedback, including from people who know exactly what I'm talking about here. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
for hosting.
This was so helpful for us to also think about, how you can use so much data that's already out there. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. I think there is just enormous scope with this data set. And
Yeah.
there's just so many themes that you could explore.
Definitely, and I think we definitely plan to make this available. So,
Wow, that's incredible.
I mean, it's so much work. I think it should be used for public good, and it's just also for replicability. It makes a lot of sense to share this. Whenever this will be published, there will be a link to probably the small subset of ads that we ended up using for the final analysis. But of course, this is also replicable using many other sources, right? So the idea that we're conveying here is that this is the Times of India because we discovered we could access it. But as you were saying, there are regional newspapers. I'm sure also in this part of the world, there are other newspapers that could be used to study other aspects related to mating. So yeah, I'm also happy to share the presentation in case some students that couldn't join today, given it's half day, if they want to look at it, I'm happy to, and they can just reach out
Thank you.
to me. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Associate Professor Zain.
Thank you.
How are you, Associate Professor? April.
Yes.
Stop the call.
Amazing, yeah. Prof, lovely.
Well, nice that it's recording, so you can
Yeah.
also share it.
Did you congratulate them on?
Just now.
Hey, Prof?
No, I congratulate her on LinkedIn, but
Okay,
in
okay,
person.
okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Okay, wanna take some
That's the-
time?
That's the beginning of it, a lot.
Take a picture of.
Yeah. Let's take a picture.
All right.
I mean, a very different world. Okay. Of the UN. But I'm attentive.
那我这样子吗？这样子，我这样。
Thank you.
对，我这他们好嘞。
Sure. In sociology. No, computer science. Yeah, this is-
So computationally very interesting.